My name is Helena, and I'm 44 years old, and the night my own children left me shivering outside my house, something inside me froze forever. It still feels strange to say those words out loud. I was raised to believe that family was everything, the kind of bond that could withstand anything life threw at it. When I married Thomas at 22, we built our life around that belief. Our house was the heart of it, a large, welcoming home with a red front door, a wraparound porch, and the kind of garden Thomas always said would make our kids proud to come home. For years, it did. Fiona and Derek were my world. I worked 2 jobs when they were little so they'd never go without. I packed their lunches, stayed up sewing costumes for their school plays, and clapped the loudest at every recital and game. I thought that kind of love would circle back one day, that when I grew older, they'd protect me the way I protected them. But love doesn't always come back the way you give it. It started subtly. Fiona, my oldest, moved back home first. She said her apartment lease ended and she needed a few months to figure things out. She was 25 then, bright, ambitious, but also entitled in a way that made me nervous. Derek followed a few months later, saying he'd save money if he stayed with me. I was happy to have them close again. The house had felt too quiet since Thomas passed away, but it didn't take long to realize this wasn't a family reunion, it was a takeover. They started changing things. Fiona replaced my dining room chairs with something more modern. Derek moved his gaming setup into Thomas's old study. They stopped eating dinner with me, ordering takeout and locking themselves in their rooms. I told myself it was temporary, that they were just adjusting, but the distance grew colder every day. One afternoon, I overheard them laughing in the kitchen. Fiona said something like, "Mom's so old-fashioned, she doesn't get how life works now." I stood in the hallway, holding a basket of folded laundry, realizing they weren't even whispering. They didn't care if I heard. That night, I tried to set some boundaries. I asked them to please clean up after themselves and to respect the shared spaces. Fiona rolled her eyes and muttered, "We're adults, Mom. Stop treating us like kids." Derek laughed and said, "Maybe you should relax. It's not the 50s anymore." Their words stung, but I swallowed the pain. I didn't want to be the nagging mother. I wanted peace. Then came that night, the one that changed everything. It was late December, the kind of night where the cold seeps through your bones. I was on the porch bringing in the last of the potted plants before the frost hit. The wind bit through my sweater, and I called into the house for Derek to help. He didn't answer. I set down the pot and tried the doorknob. It didn't budge. Locked. At first, I thought it was an accident. I knocked softly. "Fiona? Derek? Can someone open the door?" No answer. I knocked louder, then harder. I could hear faint music from inside, laughter, voices, the sound of clinking glasses. They were having friends over. I tried again. "Fiona, Derek, please, open the door." Through the frosted window, I saw a flicker of movement, Fiona's silhouette. Then Derek appeared beside her. I waved, relieved, until I saw the smirk on his face. Fiona mouthed something. It looked like, "Oops." And then they turned away. The sound of their laughter hit harder than the wind. I stood there, shivering, knocking until my knuckles hurt. Minutes passed, then maybe an hour, I don't even know. My breath came out in white clouds. My hands went numb. I finally sank down on the porch steps, pulling my cardigan tighter, tears freezing on my cheeks. When I finally heard the door unlock, I was too weak to stand. Fiona opened it casually, saying, "You should have had your keys, Mom. It's not our fault." Derek chuckled behind her, not even looking at me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how they could be so cruel, but all I did was walk past them quietly, numb and trembling, straight to my room. I sat on my bed for hours, staring at the framed photo of Thomas on my nightstand. He had built this home with his hands, every wall, every floorboard. And now, our children were turning it into something unrecognizable. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The house felt colder than it ever had. I kept replaying the moment I saw their faces through the glass, the way they laughed as I begged to be let in. By morning, my hands were swollen, my eyes raw from crying. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for one of them to apologize. Neither did. Fiona just breezed past, scrolling through her phone, and Derek grabbed a snack before heading out. Not one word, not one glance. That was the moment it hit me, I wasn't their mother anymore. I was just someone occupying space they thought they owned. As I sat there, staring into the empty cup, I felt something shift deep inside me. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was clarity. The kind that comes when you finally stop denying the truth. They had left me outside in the cold once. I decided I'd make sure they'd never have the chance to do it again. That night, something broke inside me, and in its place, something stronger began to take shape. Even after I stepped back into that house, the cold never really left me. It's strange how a single night can live inside your bones. Weeks passed after that humiliating evening, yet every time I walked past the front door, I could almost feel the frost creeping through the cracks again. I'd touch the doorknob and shiver, not because of the temperature, but because of the memory. I told myself I'd forgive them. I told myself that mothers are supposed to be patient, that Fiona and Derek were just young and foolish. But patience is a fragile thing when it's trampled on every single day. They pretended that nothing had happened. The next morning, Fiona asked me to wash her clothes for a work event. Derek wanted me to pick up his car insurance paperwork. I did it, silently, because part of me still hoped they'd come around, that they'd realize how much they'd hurt me, but they didn't. Over the next few weeks, I watched my house, my sanctuary, slowly turn into something foreign. Fiona began inviting her friends over almost every night. They drank wine in the living room Thomas had built by hand, laughing loudly as they played music on full blast. Once, I walked in to find one of them sitting in Thomas's old recliner with her shoes up on the armrest. It felt like a desecration. When I asked Fiona to keep it down, she sighed dramatically. "Mom, you're always so tense. You should try to relax. It's just furniture. Just furniture." That phrase kept echoing in my head for days. To me, that chair wasn't furniture, it was Thomas. It was the spot where he'd read bedtime stories, where he'd nap on Sundays after mowing the lawn, where he'd sit with a cup of tea while we talked about growing old together. But to Fiona, it was just another piece of the house she believed would soon belong to her. Derek wasn't any better. He'd taken over Thomas's study, turning it into his workspace, though all he did was play games and stream movies. I found his empty beer cans on Thomas's desk, the same desk where Thomas wrote letters, bills, and plans for the future. One afternoon, I noticed that my jewelry box looked lighter. My mother's gold locket was missing. When I asked Fiona, she scoffed. "You probably misplaced it. You're always forgetting things lately." That hurt in a different way, because it wasn't just theft. It was gaslighting. I began to doubt myself, wondering if I was really losing my memory. But, deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what was happening. I confided in my oldest friend Nora over coffee one morning. She's been my rock since college, the kind of woman who tells the truth even when it's hard to hear. When I told her everything, the laughter, the cold, the missing locket, she didn't hesitate. "Helena," she said, leaning forward, "they're taking advantage of you. You have to stand up for yourself." "I can't," I whispered. "They're my children." "Then teach them what that word means again," she said. That night, I sat alone in the living room long after everyone had gone to bed. I looked around at the photos on the mantel: birthdays, vacations, first days of school. In each one, their faces were full of joy and trust. When had that love vanished? Maybe it hadn't. Maybe greed had simply buried it. From that moment on, I began paying closer attention. I started keeping a small notebook tucked inside my purse. In it, I wrote dates, times, small details: what went missing, what they said, how they acted. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about truth. I needed to see, in writing, what was really happening around me. It didn't take long to fill the first few pages. Every entry confirmed what I already knew. They weren't living with me. They were living off me. Then, one evening over dinner, Fiona looked up from her phone and said, "You know, Mom, this house is way too big for you. Have you thought about selling it?" I froze. "Selling it?" "Yeah," she said casually, sipping her wine. "You could move into a condo or something smaller. We could split the money, you'd have plenty left over, and Derek and I could finally invest in our futures." Her words sliced through me like glass. Derek nodded along, pretending to be practical. "She's right, Mom. You're always talking about how hard upkeep is. You deserve to rest." Rest. That's what they called it, stripping me of the last piece of my life that still belonged to Thomas and me. I didn't say a word. I just stared at them both, realizing I wasn't their mother anymore. I was their obstacle. That night, after they went to bed, I sat in Thomas's old study, surrounded by his things. I touched the grain of his desk, smelled the faint scent of his cologne that still lingered on the wood, and whispered, I think it's time to protect what's ours, Thomas. It wasn't anger I felt then. It was purpose. Cold, steady, deliberate purpose. The next morning, I called Nora. Do you know any good lawyers? I asked. She hesitated only for a second before saying, yes, her name's Sylvia. She's discreet and she's tough as nails. And just like that, the first step of my quiet rebellion began. When Fiona suggested selling the house to split the inheritance early, I finally realized their true intentions and I knew it was time to act. Every nail, every wall, every blooming rosebush out front was a piece of me and they wanted to tear it all down. The morning after Fiona suggested selling the house, I woke up before dawn and walked through every room in silence. The floors creaked the way they always had, a familiar sound that once made the house feel alive. Now, it felt like the echo of a ghost. I stopped in the living room first. The early sunlight slipped through the lace curtains I had sewn myself 20 years ago. I remembered standing on a ladder with Thomas, laughing as we tried to hang them straight. Back then, we didn't have much, but we had each other and that made everything beautiful. When we built this house, Thomas used to say, "This will be our forever place, Helena. A place our children will always come home to." He'd saved for years, working double shifts at the auto plant, just to make the down payment. I helped where I could bookkeeping for local businesses during the day, tutoring kids in the evenings. Every dollar went into this house. Every wall, every window frame held a story of our love and sacrifice. But now, our children wanted to sell it, like it was just another asset. I ran my hand over the banister. Thomas sanded smooth himself. My chest tightened with the ache of betrayal. How did we raise them to value money more than memories? I whispered to the empty air. Fiona came downstairs later that morning, already dressed in a blazer. She had a coffee cup in one hand and a real estate brochure in the other. "Morning, Mom," she said in a falsely bright tone. "I made some calls. We could get a really good price for the property right now. The market's hot." Her voice sounded rehearsed, businesslike, not the tone of a daughter talking to her mother, but of a broker trying to close a deal. "I'm not selling," I said firmly. She looked annoyed. "Mom, don't be stubborn. You don't need this big house. It's not safe for you to live here alone anyway." "I've been living here alone for years," I replied quietly. "It's safer than living with people who think they can decide what's best for me." Her face hardened. "Fine, but don't come to us when you can't afford the upkeep anymore." And with that, she grabbed her purse and left. After the door closed, I stood in the kitchen for a long while, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. The silence pressed against my chest. I felt that same chill again, not from the winter outside, but from the coldness of my own children. I knew I couldn't fight them with anger. That would only fuel their narrative that I was emotional, unstable, too attached. I had to be smarter than that. That afternoon, I met with Sylvia, the lawyer Nora recommended. Her office was small but neat, tucked away behind a flower shop downtown. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing look, as if she'd seen 100 women like me before, mothers trying to protect what's theirs. "How can I help you, Mrs. Green?" she asked, motioning for me to sit. I hesitated before speaking. "I want to make sure my children can't sell my home. Not now, not after I'm gone unless I say so." She nodded slowly, listening. "Do you have a will, Helena?" "I do," I said. "Thomas and I made one years ago, leaving everything to the children equally. But now, I'm not sure that's what he would have wanted." Sylvia leaned back. "You'd be surprised how many people come to me with that same sentence. Let's talk about what you want." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control. We went over documents, discussed options, and by the end of our meeting, she promised to draft a new will, one that would protect my home and everything Thomas and I had built. When I returned home that evening, Fiona and Derek were in the living room with a man I didn't recognize. He wore a suit and carried a clipboard. "Mom," Fiona said, her tone falsely cheerful, "this is Alan. He's a realtor friend of mine. He's just giving us a free home evaluation. We're just getting information. Relax." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. I wanted to scream, to throw them out, but instead, I smiled politely at the realtor. "I appreciate your time," I said softly, "but this house isn't for sale." He looked uncomfortable, glancing at Fiona. "I understand, ma'am. I'll, come back another time." He left quickly, sensing the tension. When the door closed, Fiona's mask cracked. "You just embarrassed me in front of a professional." "No," I said, meeting her eyes. You embarrassed yourself in front of your mother. The words hung in the air. For a second, she looked like a little girl again, caught and ashamed. Then, her expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Mom. I smiled. No, I'm correcting. One. She stormed upstairs, and I heard the slam of her bedroom door. Later that night, I sat in Thomas's study, lit only by the glow of a small desk lamp. I found his old notebook tucked in the drawer, the one where he'd written lists and dreams. The last page had a note in his handwriting. This house is more than wood and brick, Lena. It's our story. Protect it. My hands trembled as I traced the words. I whispered to him, I will, Thomas. I promise. From that moment, I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't confront my children directly. I wouldn't argue or shout. I'd let them believe they were winning, all while quietly taking back control. The next morning, I called Sylvia again. I'm ready, I told her. Because if my children wanted to destroy the house that built me, I would build something stronger, something they could never tear down. For weeks, I played the perfect fool and they never saw the storm I was preparing. When you've lived long enough, you learn that silence can be louder than shouting. After the confrontation with Fiona and the realtor, I decided silence would become my armor. I would smile when I needed to. I would nod, listen, even pretend to forget. They'd think they'd broken me, when in reality, I was rebuilding myself from the inside out. I started with small gestures. I cooked breakfast again, Fiona's favorite omelets, Derek's pancakes like nothing had ever happened. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, asked polite questions about their work and plans. At first, they seemed wary, expecting me to lash out. When I didn't, they relaxed. Fiona even said one morning, It's good to see you acting normal again, Mom. That was the key word. I wasn't normal. I was careful. Behind the scenes, I continued working with Sylvia. Every Wednesday afternoon, while Fiona was at the gym and Derek was out with his friends, I'd drive downtown to Sylvia's office. Together, we went through documents, signatures, and clauses. I told her exactly how I wanted things to go, my home, my accounts, every piece of my life. By the time we were done, the foundation of my new will was solid and sealed tight. The funny thing about pretending is how easy it becomes when you've been ignored for so long. They didn't notice when I started moving important files out of the house. They didn't see the subtle way I labeled boxes for donation when I was really transferring sentimental items to Nora's basement. They didn't even question when I began spending more time gardening, though really, I was meeting with Mr. Dorsey Thomas's old accountant, who helped me open a private account in my name only. During one of our secret meetings, Sylvia leaned back in her chair and smiled. You're doing everything right, Helena. Calm, strategic, quiet. That's how women like you win, I returned her smile, though part of me still hurt at the thought of needing to win against my own children. Back home, life settled into an eerie rhythm. Fiona would bring home expensive takeout and act generous by offering me leftovers. Derek started talking about moving out soon, but I could tell he had no plans to actually do it. They were both too comfortable living rent-free, eating my food, enjoying the comfort Thomas and I had built. One night at dinner, Fiona casually said, Mom, I'm glad we're all getting along again. I know things got tense, but you can trust us. We just want what's best for you. I looked up from my plate and smiled sweetly. Of course, dear. I know you do. She didn't notice the bitterness hidden under my calm tone. Inside, I was studying them. Every word, every glance, every hint of greed. I wasn't just their mother anymore, I was their quiet observer. When Derek wasn't home, I'd step into the study and look around. It broke my heart every time I saw his mess spread across Thomas's old desk. But I never said a word. I wanted them to believe I was docile, harmless. They'd grown careless around me, and that carelessness would become my weapon. It was late one Wednesday when Sylvia called me. The new will's ready, she said. We just need to finalize it with witnesses. I felt my heart race not from fear, but from the gravity of what that meant. Once I signed, there would be no going back. Let's do it, I told her. A few days later, Sylvia came to the house under the pretense of an insurance checkup. Fiona barely looked up from her laptop when she arrived. Derek waved from the couch, thinking she was just another visitor. In my bedroom, away from their eyes, I sat at the small writing desk and signed every page Sylvia placed in front of me. Each pen stroke felt like a quiet act of liberation. When we finished, Sylvia placed the papers in a sealed envelope and looked me in the eye. You did the right thing. I nodded. Now all that's left is the performance. That performance began the very next morning. Fiona asked me to babysit her friend's dog while she went to brunch. Derek needed me to pick up dry cleaning. I said yes to everything, smiling all the while. Let them think I was back to being the accommodating mother. But inside, I was counting the days until they'd discover how little they truly knew about me. One evening, I overheard Fiona talking to Derek in the kitchen. Once Mom passes, we'll finally have freedom, she said, laughing softly. I stood in the hallway, hidden in the shadows, every muscle in my body trembling. She spoke about my death like it was an upcoming event, something to plan for, something to benefit from. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to demand how they could speak that way, but I didn't. I walked back to my room, shut the door, and sat in the dark until the anger drained away. Then I smiled, because now, I knew for certain, what I was doing wasn't cruel, it was justice. That night I opened my journal, the same one where I had recorded every slight, every cruel word, every moment of humiliation, and I wrote one final entry on the last page. They think I've forgiven them. They think I've forgotten. But soon, they'll understand what it means to be left out in the cold. I closed the book and placed it in my dresser drawer beside Thomas's old watch. I imagined his voice calm, steady, proud. And for the first time in a long time, I slept peacefully. But on the very day I signed my new will, I decided to test their loyalty one last time to see if there was even a flicker of love left in them at all. I wanted to see if there was even a spark of love left or if greed had burned it all away. After I signed the new will, I felt lighter, not happy, but calm. The kind of calm that comes when you've accepted a painful truth. Still, there was one thing left I needed to know before I could truly close the chapter on Fiona and Derek. I needed to see if there was any love left in them at all. I decided I'd test it quietly, in a way that couldn't be explained away with excuses. I wouldn't confront them or accuse them. I'd simply ask for something small, something any child who cared about their mother would do without hesitation. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One Friday morning, I told them over breakfast that I wasn't feeling well. My voice was weak but steady. I think I'm coming down with something, I said. Would one of you mind picking up my prescription later? It's just at the pharmacy downtown. Derek barely looked up from his phone. I've got plans with Jason tonight, Mom. Can Fiona do it? Fiona, without missing a beat, replied, I have a meeting, and then dinner. Can't it wait until tomorrow? I forced a small smile. I suppose it can. Neither looked up. The sound of forks against plates filled the crescent. Silence that followed. When they both left, I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty seat Thomas used to occupy. I remembered when Fiona was 5 and had a fever how I'd stayed up all night, placing cool towels on her forehead. When Derek broke his arm falling off his bike, I didn't leave his bedside for 3 days. And now, they couldn't even pick up a small bag of pills. The next morning, I felt worse, not physically, but emotionally. My chest ached in a way that medicine couldn't cure. I decided not to remind them. I wanted to see if they'd remember on their own. They didn't. By the second day, I could barely eat. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall outside, trying to remember when love between us had started to fade. Maybe it wasn't a single moment. Maybe it had been melting slowly, like snow under the sun, unnoticed until it was gone. On the third day, Nora stopped by unannounced. She took one look at me and frowned. Helena, you look awful. Have you been to the doctor? I shook my head. I've been waiting for the kids to pick up my prescription. Her eyes widened. They haven't done it yet? I looked down at my hands. No, they forgot. Nora's voice trembled with anger. They didn't forget. They don't care. I wanted to argue, to defend them, but the truth hung between us like heavy air. She sighed and squeezed my hand. Get your coat, I'll drive you. We went together. The pharmacist handed me the small white bag with my name printed neatly on the label. I held it in my hands the entire drive home, the way one might hold proof of something unspoken, something ugly and undeniable. When we pulled into the driveway, Fiona's car was parked out front. Through the living room window, I saw her lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine balanced on the armrest. Nora shook her head. I don't know how you stand it. I smiled faintly. Because soon, I won't have to. That evening, Fiona finally noticed me sitting at the kitchen table. Oh, hey, Mom. You went out? I did, I said softly. Picked up my medicine. Her eyebrows arched in confusion. Oh, right. I was going to get that. I just got caught up. I nodded slowly. Of course you did. The next morning, Derek came home late, smelling of alcohol and laughter. Hey, Mom, he mumbled, grabbing a soda. I figured Fiona handled it. It's all right, I said. My tone was even, almost gentle. You both have busy lives. He didn't notice the chill beneath my words. That night, I went to bed early, not because I was tired, but because I didn't trust myself to stay in the same room as them without crying or shouting. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, realizing something had shifted. The sadness was gone. In its place was something sharper resolve. The next morning, I called Sylvia and asked her to stop by the house. When she arrived, I led her straight to my room and handed her an envelope. What's this? She asked. It's the final version, I said. I want you to make sure everything's filed properly. I don't want any confusion later. She looked at me carefully. You're certain about this? More certain than I've ever been about anything. We went over every clause again, the estate, the accounts, the charitable trust in Thomas's name. Not 1 cent, not 1 stone of this house would go to Fiona or Derek. After she left, I sat by the window, watching the sky darken into a deep blue. I thought about the years I'd spent giving every meal, every birthday, every sleepless night. I'd poured all of myself into motherhood, and they had taken it for granted. But now, I was done pouring. When Fiona came home that night, she asked if I wanted to join her for dinner. We could order from that Italian place you like, she said casually. I really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see my little girl. I saw a woman who viewed me as a stepping stone, an obstacle, a resource. No, I said quietly. I've already eaten. She shrugged and went to her room, oblivious to what was unfolding beneath her own roof. I turned off the lights and went upstairs. Before I went to bed, I stood in the doorway of Thomas's study. The moonlight spilled across his old desk, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice. You did your best, Lena. Now it's time to protect what's left. I smiled faintly and whispered back, I know. That night, I finalized every last detail, and in my heart, I said goodbye. Not to life, but to the illusion of family. The day Sylvia came to the house, Fiona thought she was an insurance agent. She couldn't have been more wrong. I still remember that morning vividly, the crisp bite of the air, the soft hum of the heater, the faint scent of the coffee brewing in the kitchen. Everything about that day felt ordinary on the surface. But underneath, something monumental was about to happen. Sylvia arrived right at 10 o'clock, her timing precise as always. She wore a dark gray coat and carried a leather briefcase tucked neatly under her arm. I had invited her under the pretense of insurance paperwork, just in case Fiona or Derek happened to be home. They'd grown used to my quiet errands and didn't question much anymore. When Sylvia stepped through the door, Fiona glanced up from her laptop at the dining table. Oh, another one of your appointments, Mom? She asked, distractedly. Yes, I said, pouring myself coffee. Just some insurance renewal forms. Right, Fiona muttered, already half tuned out. Derek wasn't home, which was a relief. He'd been staying out late more often, returning in the early morning hours smelling like liquor and arrogance. That absence, for once, worked in my favor. Sylvia and I walked quietly to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind us. The room felt small, but safe, the only place left in the house where I still felt like I had control. She laid out the papers on my dresser, my final will, the trust details, and the transfer clauses. Are you ready? She asked, her voice steady but kind. I've been ready, I said. We began going over each page. I read every line slowly, carefully. With each signature, I felt lighter. It wasn't joy exactly, it was freedom, disguised as calm. My children had already taken the warmth from my life, but they would not take the rest of it. Sylvia's pen clicked as she passed me the final document. This one, she said. This ensures the property and assets are transferred to the Thomas Green Foundation. It will honor your husband's memory and help others in need. I signed it with a steady hand. Thomas would have wanted this, I whispered. He always believed our home should stand for something good. When we finished, Sylvia gathered the papers carefully and slipped them into her briefcase. She gave me a faint smile, one of understanding, not celebration. You've done the right thing, Helena. This isn't vengeance, it's protection. I nodded. Maybe it's a little of both. We shared a quiet laugh, the kind only two women who've been through battle can share. Just as Sylvia was about to leave, Fiona appeared at the end of the hallway. "Everything okay, Mom?" she asked, her tone light but curious. "Of course," I said smoothly. "Just finalizing some policies." Sylvia extended her hand. "Lovely home you have here," she said politely. Fiona smiled thinly. "Thank you. It's been in the family a long time." The irony nearly made me choke. After Sylvia left, Fiona walked into my room. "You've been meeting a lot of people lately. Lawyers, accountants. Should I be worried?" I gave her a calm, motherly smile. "No, dear. Just making sure everything's organized. I don't want to leave you and Derek with a mess someday." Her eyes softened slightly. "That's thoughtful, Mom. If only she knew." She kissed my cheek before leaving for work, and I stood there for a long moment, the ghost of her affection still lingering. It was strange how something so small could hurt so deeply. That evening, I sat in the living room, watching the light fade behind the curtains. Derek came home late again, stumbling in with his usual half-drunken grin. Fiona was upstairs on a call, laughing loudly about something trivial. The house felt hollow, full of sound but utterly empty. I thought of the signatures I'd made that morning, each one a quiet promise to myself. I had spent years giving them everything, my time, my money, my love, and now I had finally given something back to myself, peace. A few days later, Sylvia called to confirm that everything had been filed. "It's official," she said. "Your will, your trust, the transfer agreements all secured. Your wishes will be honored exactly as written." "Thank you," I said softly. She hesitated for a moment before adding, "Helena, have you told them anything?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. "Not yet. Let them think they still hold the power a little longer." That night, I sat by the fire, the same fireplace where Thomas and I used to sip cocoa on winter evenings. I could almost see his reflection in the glass, smiling that familiar, patient smile. "You did well, Lena," his voice seemed to whisper. "You've taken back what's yours." I closed my eyes, letting that imagined warmth settle into me. Later, Fiona came downstairs, holding her phone. "Mom," she said. "I was talking to Derek earlier. We were thinking, maybe we should help you manage the finances. You know, in case something ever happens." I looked at her calmly. "That's kind of you," I said, "but everything's already taken care of." She smiled, completely unaware of how true that was. "Good," she said. "I just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed." "Oh, don't worry," I said, sipping my tea. "I've never been more in control." She went back upstairs, satisfied, and I allowed myself the smallest smile. Everything was in motion now. The documents were sealed. The house was legally protected. The will was rewritten. And they had no idea. They believed they still held the upper hand, but soon, they'd learn the truth. Because the next time they left me out in the cold, I wouldn't be waiting on the porch. I'd be gone. It happened again, another cold night, another locked door. Only this time, I didn't beg to be let in. Thomas loved it too, the way the snow made everything quiet and clean. But that year, the cold didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a warning. December came fast. Fiona and Derek were busier than ever, which really meant they were throwing more parties, spending more of my money, and treating the house like a hotel. I'd stopped saying anything. My silence, they thought, meant surrender. But really, it was my calm before the storm. It was the week before Christmas when it happened again. They were hosting a party that night, a little get-together, Fiona called it, though there were at least 20 cars parked in the driveway. I hadn't agreed to it. Of course. When I reminded Fiona that this was still my house, she gave me that patronizing look I'd grown to hate. "Mom," she said sweetly, "you worry too much. We'll keep it clean. Just try to stay upstairs, okay? You get anxious around noise." Anxious. That's what she called it, the discomfort of watching my late husband's home turn into a playground for strangers. So I stayed upstairs for the first hour, sitting in my room, trying to drown out the thumping bass and laughter echoing through the walls. But when I heard something crash, glass shattering, I couldn't take it anymore. I went downstairs. The smell hit me first: alcohol, sweat, and cheap perfume. The living room was a mess of people. Someone had spilled wine on the rug Thomas and I picked out together 20 years ago. Another person was sitting on the arm of his recliner, the one I'd once called sacred. I found Fiona near the fireplace, holding a drink, laughing too loud. "Fiona," I said sharply. She turned, startled. "Mom, what are you doing down here? I told you. What is all this?" I demanded. "This isn't a small gathering. This is a circus." Her smile faded. "Don't make a scene. People are having fun." I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "In my house? In your father's house?" Her jaw tightened. "Our house, Mom. You're not the only one who's lived here." The words sliced through me like ice. "Our house?" I repeated, barely whispering. Before I could respond, Derek came over, clearly tipsy, grinning like an idiot. "Come on, Mom. Don't ruin the vibe. Have some wine. Loosen up. I want everyone out," I said firmly. He laughed, glancing at Fiona. "She's serious," he said, mocking me. "Come on, Mom, you can't just kick people out. It's cold out there." Cold. The irony wasn't lost on me. I turned to the guests and said, as calmly as I could, "The party's over. Please leave." A few people exchanged awkward looks, but most of them ignored me until Fiona raised her voice. "Everyone, stay where you are. My mother's just being dramatic again." The laughter that followed cracked something inside me. I turned and walked out the front door before I said something I couldn't take back. The air hit me hard, sharp, freezing, unkind. I stepped out onto the porch, my breath visible in white clouds. Behind me, the music still thumped. I stood there for a moment, staring at the stars, trying to calm down. Then I heard the soft click of the lock behind me. I froze. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the wind had pushed the door shut. I turned the handle. It didn't move. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. "Fiona? Derek?" My voice trembled, not from fear this time but from disbelief. Through the window, I could see silhouettes dancing, laughing. Not one of them turned toward the door. It was happening again. For a moment, my body reacted the way it had before, panic rising, breath quickening, my hands instinctively pressing against the glass. But then, something inside me stopped. No, not this time. I stepped back, staring at the door, and the cold that once felt like punishment now felt like freedom. I didn't need to knock. I didn't need to beg. Not anymore. I took my keys from my pocket and walked to my car. My fingers were stiff, but my movements were steady. The engine started on the first try. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse of the house in my rearview mirror. Bright lights, loud music, shadows of strangers moving through what used to be a home. I drove without a destination at first, letting the snow blur the world around me. The farther I went, the lighter I felt. Finally, I turned down a familiar street, Nora's street. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already at the window, robe wrapped around her, eyes wide with concern. "Helena?" she said when I stepped inside. "What on earth? They did it again," I said quietly. "They locked me out." Her face fell. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she simply wrapped her arms around me. "You're not going back there tonight," she said. "I'm not going back at all," I replied. And I meant it. That night, I slept in Nora's guest room. The first peaceful sleep I'd had in months. When I woke in the morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for the first time in years, I didn't wake to the sound of tension or resentment. Just quiet. Fiona called later that day. Her voice was sweet, practiced. "Mom, where are you? We were worried." I could almost hear Derek whispering in the background. I took a deep breath. "Don't worry," I said calmly. "I'm safe. When are you coming home?" She asked. "I won't be," I said. There was silence on the line. Then Fiona's voice sharp, impatient. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said slowly, "that home isn't a place where you're left out in the cold." I hung up before she could respond. As I sat there, looking out Nora's kitchen window at the snow-covered yard, a strange peace filled me. I had lost a home, but I had found my dignity. And that single phone call became the line that started the downfall of their comfortable lives. To them, I had disappeared, but I was watching everything unfold from afar. When I hung up the phone with Fiona that morning, I felt a kind of silence I hadn't known in years. Not the suffocating silence of being ignored in my own home, but the peaceful kind, the kind that hums quietly in your chest when you finally make a choice that's right. I didn't tell them where I went, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about it. I needed to disappear, not for revenge, but for survival. Nora agreed completely. You can't go back there, Helena, she said as she poured me a cup of tea. If you do, they'll keep breaking you piece by piece. She was right. So, I packed a single suitcase, some clothes, a few photos, and Thomas's old watch, and I left. I found a small apartment 2 hours away, in a quiet coastal town where no one knew my name. The kind of place where mornings smelled of salt and the nights were filled with the sound of waves. I signed the lease under my full name, Helena Margaret Green, but I didn't tell a soul except for Sylvia and Nora. The first few days felt strange. I kept expecting the sound of Fiona's heels clacking down the hallway, or Derek's laughter booming through the house. Instead, all I heard was the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant cries of seagulls. I spent my mornings walking along the beach, the cold sand crunching under my shoes. I'd watch the tide roll in and think of Thomas, of how he always said the ocean was proof that no matter how many times life pulls you back, you can always come rushing forward again. Back at the house, Fiona and Derek must have been realizing that their easy lives were unraveling. I'd already closed the shared bank accounts and redirected the bills. The utilities, mortgage, and property taxes were now in my name alone, and with my lawyer's filing, their access was gone. 3 days after I left, I got the first phone call. "Mom, this isn't funny," she said, her tone sharp. "We can't pay the bills. The electricity company called. They said everything's in your name." I kept my voice calm. "Yes, it is. So what are we supposed to do?" "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I said softly. "Are you really doing this to your own children?" she snapped. "I didn't do anything to you, Fiona," I replied. "You did this to yourselves." Then I ended the call. It was easier than I expected. Derek called next, a few days later. He tried charm instead of anger. "Mom, come on. You know I didn't mean to upset you. We got carried away. Let's talk about this." I almost laughed. "You got carried away the night you locked me out," I said. "That's when you lost the right to talk to me about anything." He hung up. After that, the silence was permanent, at least on my end. I spent my days in small, simple ways. I cooked meals for one. I read the old books Thomas left behind. I even started writing in a new journal, not one filled with pain and betrayal, but with thoughts about healing, about rediscovering who I was beyond being a mother. Every evening, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the ocean, watching the sun melt into the horizon. It was beautiful and lonely, but I realized that loneliness and peace can sometimes look the same, at least at first. Meanwhile, Fiona's frustration turned public. I found out through Nora, who still followed her on social media. Fiona posted a long, dramatic message about her missing mother, painting herself as the concerned daughter. "If anyone sees my mom, please contact me. She's been unwell and we're worried about her safety." Unwell. Safety. The performance was almost laughable. Part of me wanted to reply, to expose her for the liar she was. But I didn't. I stayed invisible. Sometimes, silence says more than any confrontation ever could. Sylvia checked in regularly. "Everything's moving as planned," she told me one afternoon. "The estate transition will be finalized within a few weeks. Once that's complete, they'll have no legal claim to anything." "Good," I said. "I don't want them hurt. I just want them to learn." "They will," she said gently. "Losing comfort has a way of teaching humility." And she was right. By mid-January, Fiona had started calling Nora, asking if she'd heard from me. Nora always answered the same way. "No, but I'm sure she's fine." For the first time in years, I felt whole. One morning, I was sitting by the window when a small envelope slid through the slot in my apartment door. It was from Sylvia. Inside was a simple note written in her neat handwriting. "They've just learned the truth about the will." I read that line over and over. I could almost see it, the two of them sitting in Sylvia's office, expecting reassurance, and instead hearing that everything had gone to the Thomas Green Foundation. I pictured Fiona's face going pale, Derek's fist tightening, the disbelief, the anger, the betrayal. But most of all, I pictured the moment they realized that for all their planning, for all their entitlement, they were left with nothing. And strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. Thomas used to say that justice wasn't about revenge, it was about balance. And that day, balance had finally returned. I walked down to the beach that afternoon, the wind tangling my hair, the ocean stretching endlessly ahead. For once, I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful not because I'd hurt them, but because I'd finally saved myself. And as I stood there, watching the waves crash against the shore, I knew they had finally discovered the price of leaving someone out in the cold. If you've ever seen heartbreak turn into rage, you'd understand what I saw in their eyes that day. The day of the will reading arrived cold and gray-fitting, really. I hadn't planned to attend at first. Sylvia said it wasn't necessary, that everything was legally sealed and clear. But I decided to go. Not out of spite, but because I wanted to look my children in the eyes when they finally learned the truth. The law office was a small brick building downtown, the same one where Thomas and I had signed our first will decades ago. I remember that day so vividly. He'd held my hand and whispered, "This is just paperwork, Lena. The real legacy is love." I held on to those words now, even though they stung. When I arrived, Sylvia greeted me warmly. "They're already here," she said quietly. "Are you sure you're up for this?" "I've waited a long time for this moment," I said. "I'm ready." She nodded and led me to a conference room. Fiona and Derek sat at the table, dressed in muted tones, their faces composed but expectant. Fiona had that confident smirk she wore whenever she thought she was about to get her way. Derek, on the other hand, looked bored, as if this was just another formality before the reward. The tension in the room was almost physical, heavy, like the air before a storm. Sylvia began with her usual professionalism, opening a folder filled with documents. "As the executor of Mrs. Green's estate," she started, "I'm here to formally read and confirm the contents of her will." Derek leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Can we skip to the part where Mom says everything's split between us?" Sylvia's gaze flicked up briefly. "I'll read it as written." She adjusted her glasses and began to read. "I, Helena Margaret Green, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Fiona crossed her arms, impatient. I stayed silent, hands folded neatly in my lap. Sylvia continued reading a few formal paragraphs about debts, assets, and personal effects before reaching the section that would change everything. "To my children, Fiona Elaine Green and Derek Thomas Green, I leave my love, my memories, and my hope that they someday learn the true meaning of compassion." Fiona's smirk faltered. Sylvia kept reading. "All remaining financial assets, property, and possessions, including the family home, are to be transferred to the Thomas Green Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to housing and assisting single mothers and elderly women in need." The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, I could hear nothing but the faint hum of the heater. Fiona blinked rapidly, as if she hadn't heard correctly. Derek sat frozen, mouth slightly open. Then, slowly, realization dawned. What does that mean?" Fiona stammered. "It means exactly what it says," Sylvia said calmly. "Your mother's estate has been legally transferred to the foundation." Derek slammed his hand on the table. "That can't be right. She wouldn't do that." Sylvia remained composed. "Your mother signed this will in my presence, with full understanding of its contents." Fiona turned to me then, her eyes wide and desperate. "Mom, tell her this isn't real. You were just upset." I met her gaze steadily. I meant every word. Her face twisted, part shock, part fury. "You're punishing us. For what? For wanting to help you? For wanting to plan for the future? Help me?" I said softly. "You wanted to sell my home while I was still living in it. You laughed while I begged to be let inside. That's not help, Fiona. That's cruelty." Derek stood, his voice rising. "You can't do this to your own children." I looked at him, my son, the boy who used to hold my hand crossing the street, now a man who couldn't see past his own greed. "You already did worse to me," I said quietly. He froze, chest heaving. Sylvia cleared her throat. "All legal protocols were followed. The signatures have been verified. This document is binding and final." Fiona's face went pale. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "You can't just leave everything to charity." "I didn't leave it to charity," I said, my voice steady. "I left it to purpose. To something that will bring warmth to people who actually know what it means to be left out in the cold." She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You can't mean that." I rose from my seat, gathering my coat. "I do." For a moment, no one moved. Derek stood trembling, fists clenched. Fiona just stared at me like she didn't recognize me at all. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the version of me they'd built in their minds, the weak, forgiving mother who always gave in, had finally died. I turned to Sylvia. "Thank you," I said quietly. As I reached the door, Derek shouted after me. "You'll regret this, Mom. We'll fight it. We'll get lawyers." I paused, hand on the doorknob, and looked back one last time. "You left me in the cold," I said softly. "Now I'm simply leaving you outside my will." The words seemed to hang in the air like frost. Fiona gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Derek's anger drained into disbelief. And with that, I walked out. The wind outside was sharp, but it didn't bite like it used to. It felt clean, a new beginning. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I looked up at the pale sky and whispered to Thomas, "It's done." When I glanced back through the office window, I saw Fiona's head buried in her hands, Derek pacing like a caged animal. Their reflections looked small, fragile, even. For years I'd believed they were my world. Now I realized they were just part of a chapter I'd finally finished. Sylvia joined me outside a few moments later. "You handled that with grace," she said. "I didn't want to hurt them," I admitted. "I just wanted them to understand." "And do you think they will?" I looked back one more time, then shook my head. "Not yet, but someday." We parted ways, and as I drove home my new home, I felt a strange peace fill the silence of the car. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or helpless. I felt strong. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they were wrong. Because what they left behind was the only thing I ever really needed: my freedom. For the first time in years, my house felt truly warm even though I wasn't the one living in it. The days following the will reading were oddly quiet. Not the kind of silence that comes from loneliness, but the calm that follows a storm you've survived. Every sound in my new coastal apartment, the hum of the kettle, the rhythm of the waves, felt like proof that life had shifted into something peaceful. Sylvia called me 2 days later. "It's done," she said. "The Thomas Green Foundation officially owns the estate." I didn't speak for a moment. The words hit harder than I expected. That house had been my life, my marriage, my motherhood, my memories, all wrapped in wood and brick. Letting it go hurt, but the pain carried purpose. "What will they do with it?" I asked quietly. "The board decided to convert it into a shelter for homeless women and children," she said. "They'll call it the Thomas Green Home." My breath caught. "Thomas would have liked that," I whispered. "He'd be proud," she replied. I thanked her and hung up, then sat by the window for a long time, staring out at the sea. Somewhere in my heart, I knew the house would finally hold love again, just not the kind I had once dreamed of. Meanwhile, Fiona and Derek were unraveling. I didn't need to see it to know. Nora kept me updated. "They went to the press," she said over the phone one morning, half amused, half disgusted. "Told some reporter you were manipulated by lawyers. The story's spreading online." I sighed. "Of course it is." "Don't worry," Nora added. "People aren't buying it. Most of the comments are calling them entitled brats." I couldn't help but smile. The truth has a way of finding its own audience. Later, out of curiosity, I searched for the article myself. There, it was a headline that read, "Mother leaves fortune to charity, children left with nothing." They used an old photo of me, one from Thomas's memorial service, my eyes red, my face pale. Beneath it was a picture of Fiona and Derek, perfectly composed, pretending to be victims. The journalist had quoted Fiona, "We just wanted to help our mother manage her assets. This was never about money. Never about money." The words almost made me laugh out loud. I closed the article, shut my laptop, and made a promise to myself. I would not let bitterness follow me into this new life. They'd already taken enough. A week later, Nora and I drove back to my old neighborhood. She wanted to show me something. As we turned the corner onto Maple Lane, I saw it my house, but transformed. The red door was freshly painted, and a new sign hung on the front gate. "The Thomas Green Foundation Home, a place for hope and warmth." The sight of it stole my breath. Through the windows, I could see movement volunteers painting, women carrying boxes, children running through the halls. Laughter filled the air. I parked across the street, tears pricking my eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered. Nora nodded. "It's alive again, Helena. You gave it back its soul." We sat there for a long time, watching. Every sound, the children's giggles, the clatter of dishes, the faint hum of a lullaby playing somewhere inside, felt like music. For years, that house had been filled with coldness and greed. Now, it radiated warmth. A volunteer stepped outside and began placing small potted plants along the porch. Roses. Thomas's roses. I smiled through tears. He would have loved this. You did this, Nora said. You turned pain into something good. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the image of that house full of life. The thought of it made me both proud and wistful. For all the pain I'd endured, I'd finally turned that pain into purpose. But fate wasn't done with me yet. A few days later, I checked my mail and found an envelope without a return address. Inside was a single handwritten letter. My heart raced as I unfolded it and saw the familiar handwriting, shaky, uneven, but unmistakable. It was from Fiona. Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me, but please read this. I'm not angry anymore, just lost. Derek and I aren't speaking. I don't have much left. I guess this is what it takes to see the truth. I was selfish, blind, and cruel. You didn't deserve what we did. I see that now. If you never forgive me, I understand. But I needed to tell you that I'm sorry. I miss you. Love, Fiona. My hands trembled as I read it. The words blurred with tears I didn't realize had fallen. For so long, I'd told myself I didn't care anymore, that I'd sealed that part of me off forever. But the truth was, I had never stopped being her mother. I folded the letter gently, pressing it to my chest. Nora came by later that evening. When I showed her the letter, she read it quietly, then looked at me with kind eyes. Are you going to respond? I don't know, I said softly. Part of me wants to forgive her. Another part still remembers standing outside that door, freezing. Then maybe you forgive her, Nora said gently. But you don't forget. Her words stayed with me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't for Fiona's sake. It was for mine. I lit a candle by the window that night, not for mourning, but for peace. And as the flame flickered against the glass, I knew my story wasn't ending with revenge, it was only beginning with redemption. The handwriting was shaky, the kind of handwriting that comes when guilt eats away at your heart. I must have read Fiona's letter 100 times that night. Every word seemed to echo in my chest, pulling at old scars I thought had hardened over. I sat at my small kitchen table, the ocean wind rattling the window panes, tracing each loop and curve of her handwriting with my fingertips. For the first time in years, her words sounded like my daughter again, not the cold, polished woman she'd become, but the girl who used to curl up beside me after a nightmare and whisper, "Don't let go. Mom." I didn't sleep much. The letter stayed on my nightstand, as if it might disappear if I looked away. When morning came, I brewed a pot of tea and stared out at the gray sky. The ache in my chest was different this time, softer, but heavier in a way. Nora came by around noon, as she often did, bringing pastries and her steady presence. She found me sitting in the same chair, Fiona's letter still on the table. "You've been up all night," she said, eyeing the dark circles under my eyes. I couldn't stop reading it, I admitted. She poured herself some tea and sat across from me. "She sounds sincere." "I don't know what sincerity sounds like anymore," I whispered. "After everything that's happened, I don't know what to believe." Nora leaned back, watching me quietly. "You don't have to decide today," she said gently. "Guilt makes people reach out, but healing takes time. Maybe she needs you to know she's changed. Maybe you need to know that too." Her words lingered long after she left. That evening, I walked along the beach, the letter folded neatly in my coat pocket. The tide was low, and the setting sun cast a thin golden shimmer across the water. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to be everything to everyone, the devoted wife, the perfect mother, the peacemaker. Somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. But in losing everything else, I had found her again, the woman who could stand alone. Still, part of me couldn't help but ache for the family I'd built, even if it was fractured beyond repair. When I got home, I sat down at my desk, pulled out a fresh piece of paper, and began to write. "Fiona, I got your letter. I've read it more times than I can count. You should know that I forgive you, not because what you did was small, but because carrying the anger has grown too heavy for me to hold." I paused, staring at the page, the words blurring as tears welled in my eyes. "You and Derek hurt me in ways I never thought my children could. You made me feel unwanted in my own home, and that memory will always sting. But I also know pain changes people. It has certainly changed me." I wiped my tears and continued. "I can't pretend things can go back to how they were. Too much has been broken. But I believe in second chances, not to erase the past, but to start a different kind of future. You'll have to build yours without the foundation you once took for granted. I hope that one day, you'll use what you've learned to bring warmth to someone else's life." I paused again, thinking of Thomas, wondering what he would have said if he'd seen all this unfold. I could almost hear his voice. Don't let bitterness write your last chapter, Lena. So I ended the letter with the only truth I knew. I love you, Fiona. I always will. But love doesn't mean trust, not yet. Trust is something we'll have to rebuild slowly, one honest step at a time. Mom, when I sealed the envelope, I slipped something inside before closing it, a small donation receipt from the Thomas Green Foundation, made in Fiona's name. It wasn't much, but it was symbolic. A gesture of peace. A reminder that even broken love can create something good. The next morning, I walked to the post office and dropped the letter into the blue metal mailbox. The clink of it hitting the bottom sounded final, like closing a door that had been left open too long. Days passed. No reply came. At first, I checked the mail constantly, half expecting another letter, maybe even a phone call. But nothing arrived. Eventually, I stopped checking so often. I told myself that maybe she needed time, the kind of time that allows guilt to turn into growth. One chilly afternoon, I visited the foundation home again. The renovations were complete now. The house gleamed in the winter sunlight, freshly painted, warm and alive. Inside, laughter filled the air. Women chatted in the kitchen while children ran through the halls. A volunteer I recognized smiled when she saw me. "Mrs. Green, would you like to see the plaque?" I nodded, following her into the foyer. There, mounted near the fireplace, was a bronze plaque that read, "In loving memory of Thomas and Helena Green for building a home that always has room for one more." My breath caught. I hadn't known they planned to add my name. For a moment, I had to steady myself against the wall. I realized that even though I had lost so much, something beautiful had been built from the wreckage. My story, our story, was now part of something bigger than pain. As I was leaving, I looked back at the house one last time. A woman stood by the window, holding her child, smiling as sunlight spilled across her face. It was then I understood. Love, in its truest form, was never about possession. It was about giving, even when it hurts. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, the ocean whispering softly beyond the glass. The letter from Fiona lay beside me, worn at the edges but still whole, like the bond between us. Fragile, but not broken. Fiona never wrote back, but in her silence, I heard something I hadn't in years. The sound of remorse, of reflection, of love finally trying to find its way home. It's strange, the warmth I sought from my family, I found among strangers. Months passed, and with each sunrise, the ache inside me softened a little more. Time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest edges of pain, leaving behind something smoother, something survivable. I still thought of Fiona and Derek often, but not with the same bitterness that once consumed me. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only quiet understanding and a determination to live the rest of my life with meaning. The Thomas Green Foundation home officially opened in the spring. Sylvia invited me to the ceremony, and though I hesitated at first, I knew I had to go. I wanted to see what had become of the house Thomas and I built, the one I'd protected, even if it meant breaking my own heart. When I arrived, the garden was in full bloom. The roses, Thomas's roses, had survived the winter, just as I had. The porch had been repainted, a soft cream, and new flower boxes hung beneath every window. The air was filled with laughter, children's voices, and the kind of life the house hadn't known in years. Inside, everything felt transformed. The walls were brighter, the rooms lighter, filled with warm colors and soft music. The staff had done a beautiful job of turning pain into purpose. I could almost feel Thomas's presence beside me, his hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You did it, Lena. You kept the promise." As I walked through the halls, I was greeted by smiles from women I didn't know, women carrying babies, folding laundry, preparing meals together. Their eyes carried stories of hardship, but also hope. A young woman approached me shyly. "You're Mrs. Green, right?" "Yes," I said gently. "Please, call me Helena." She smiled nervously. "I just wanted to thank you. This place, it saved me. My son and I were living in our car before we came here. Now I have a job interview next week. And my little boy sleeps in a real bed." Her words struck something deep within me. I took her hand. "You don't owe me thanks," I said. "Just promise me you'll pay that kindness forward someday." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I will." Her name was Lacey, and over the next few weeks, we became close. I began volunteering at the foundation, helping where I could, sorting donations, teaching, budgeting classes, even cooking on weekends. Lacey reminded me so much of Fiona when she was young, bright, stubborn, full of potential but unsure of her place in the world. One afternoon, as we planted new flowers by the front steps, Lacey said softly, "You know, you could have just given up. Most people would have. But instead, you built this." I smiled, wiping soil from my hands. "It's funny. I thought I was building something for others, but I think I was really rebuilding myself." She grinned. Either way, it worked. Her laughter was light and genuine, a sound I hadn't heard in that house for years. Each visit to the foundation filled me with something I hadn't felt since Thomas died: belonging. The women there didn't see me as fragile or foolish. They saw me as strong, capable, someone who had turned loss into light. And in return, they gave me something I'd long forgotten I needed: community. Soon, I began organizing small evening gatherings, story nights, we called them. The residents and volunteers would sit together in the living room, candles flickering, as each person shared a story from their life. Some were funny, some heartbreaking, but all were honest. And every time someone spoke, I felt that house grow warmer. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The fire crackled softly. I looked around and thought of all the nights I had spent in this very room feeling unwanted, unheard, unloved. Now, the air buzzed with warmth and safety. Thomas's portrait still hung above the mantel, right where it always had. I whispered up to it, "We did it, my love. Our home finally became what you dreamed it would be." After that, the foundation became part of my daily life. I split my time between my quiet apartment by the coast and the bustling home that now belonged to the women who needed it most. Every day, I found new joy in small things: helping a mother write her first resume, teaching a child how to read, planting another rosebush out front. One afternoon, I was sitting in the garden when Nora came to visit. She looked around, smiling. "It's incredible, Helena. You've built a legacy out of heartbreak." "I didn't build it alone," I said. "I just lit the first spark. The rest took care of itself." She chuckled. "You know, you sound like your husband when you say things like that." We laughed together, the kind of laughter that feels like healing. As the sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over the garden, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I was grateful for what I'd found. When I left that evening, I turned back one last time to look at the house. Through the window, I could see Lacey reading a bedtime story to her son. The lamplight cast a warm glow across their faces. That image stayed with me, a reminder that love doesn't always return the way you expect it to. Sometimes it finds its way back to you through the lives you've touched. And that night, as I stood by Thomas's grave, I whispered softly, "You were right, my darling. Love doesn't die, it just changes homes." As I turned to leave, the sound of footsteps behind me made me pause. A familiar voice called out, trembling but unmistakable, "Mom?" I froze. My heart stopped for a beat. I turned slowly, and there she was, Fiona, standing at the edge of the path, her eyes full of tears. And in that moment, I realized that some stories aren't meant to end in silence, they're meant to find their way back to where they began. When I turned around and saw her, my heart stopped, not from fear, but from something deeper. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cemetery was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of evening traffic. Fiona stood a few yards away, her hair windswept, her coat too thin for the chill. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence, in pride. "Fiona," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped forward hesitantly, her eyes red and glistening. "I didn't know if you'd still come here," she said. "I always come here," I replied softly. "Thomas and I planted the rosebush behind that stone together. It still blooms every spring." Her gaze followed mine toward the gravestone. For a moment, she said nothing, then whispered, "I remember. Dad used to let me water it. I thought it was my job." I smiled faintly. "It was." She let out a shaky laugh, then fell silent again. I could tell she'd rehearsed something, a speech, an apology, maybe both, but now that she was standing in front of me, the words seemed to escape her. "I read your letter," I said gently. "It meant more than you think." Fiona's eyes filled again. "I didn't expect you to write back. I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't." "I did," I said. I sent it weeks ago. Her brow furrowed. You did? I never got it. Maybe it got lost, I said quietly. Though in my heart I knew fate sometimes delays the words we aren't ready to hear. She nodded slowly, wiping her cheeks. I needed to see you. I needed you to know I meant every word of what I wrote. I was horrible to you, Mom. The things I said, the way I treated you. Her voice broke. I can't forgive myself. The rawness in her tone pierced through me. I had imagined this moment 1,000 ways, anger, shouting, bitterness, but not this. Not the fragile honesty trembling in her voice. I took a cautious step forward. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. She looked up sharply. Why? Because I had to, I said simply. Holding on to that pain was like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die. Forgiveness isn't a gift I gave you, Fiona. It's a freedom I gave myself. Her lips trembled, and she nodded, understanding even if it hurt. I don't deserve it, she whispered. Maybe not, I said softly. But that's the thing about forgiveness, it's not earned, it's offered. We stood there in silence for a while, the cold air swirling between us. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded paper. I've been volunteering, she said quietly. At the foundation. My breath caught. You have? She nodded. Every week. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want it to seem like I was doing it for attention, but I needed to see the place to understand what you did. And now I do. I smiled through the tears welling in my eyes. How do you like it? Her lips curved into a soft, uncertain smile. I love it. I help with the kids mostly. There's this little boy who reminds me of Derek when he was small, always running, always laughing. Every time I see him, I think about how happy we used to be. And I realize, I ruined that. I took that warmth from us. I shook my head gently. You didn't ruin it, Fiona. You lost it. But you can still build it again differently. She sniffled, nodding. I want to, Mom. I really do. Not just with you, with life. I want to be better. I stepped closer. Close enough to see the lines of exhaustion under her eyes. The kind that come from nights spent crying more than sleeping. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. Her breath caught. I didn't think you'd ever touch me again. You're still my daughter, I said softly. That will never change. At that, she broke sobs, shaking her shoulders as she collapsed against me. I held her, and for the first time in years, I felt my child in my arms again. Not the woman who betrayed me, not the stranger who mocked me, but the little girl I once carried through thunderstorms, whispering that everything would be okay. We stayed like that for a long time. When she finally pulled away, her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me even when I deserved it. I almost did, I admitted, but something told me you'd find your way back. She smiled faintly. Dad used to say you had a sixth sense about us. He wasn't wrong, I said with a chuckle. The air between us felt lighter now, the way it used to before greed and pride poisoned everything. We talked for hours after that about the foundation, about Derek, about life. I learned that Derek had left town months ago, chasing some ill-fated business venture. Fiona didn't know where he was, but she hoped he'd find peace too someday. As the sun dipped low, Fiona looked toward Thomas's gravestone and whispered, I'm sorry, Dad. I followed her gaze. He forgave you long before I did, I said quietly. Before we parted, she asked softly, can I see you again? Maybe we could have dinner sometime. I don't expect things to be the same, I just don't want them to end here. I reached out and squeezed her hand. I'd like that. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Fiona? She turned, her face illuminated by the fading light. I'm proud of you, I said. Not for being perfect, but for finally being honest. Tears shimmered in her eyes again, but this time, they were tears of healing, not regret. When she was gone, I stayed by Thomas's grave a little longer. The wind carried the faint scent of roses, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. I looked up at the sky and whispered, You can rest easy now, my love. Our daughter's found her way home. In that moment, I realized revenge had given me justice, but forgiveness had given me peace. I used to think revenge was about payback, but it's really about reclaiming your peace. Winter came around again, as it always does, but this time it felt different. The cold no longer stung the way it once had. The wind didn't whisper of loneliness. It carried a strange comfort, the kind that comes when life finally feels balanced. I woke up one December morning to the sound of waves crashing softly beyond my window and the smell of cinnamon from the kitchen downstairs. The world felt still, wrapped in frost and light. I made myself a cup of tea, wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, and sat by the window overlooking the sea. For the first time in many years, winter didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a reward. A year had passed since the day Fiona and I stood at Thomas's grave. We'd kept our promise, slow steps, honest conversations, careful rebuilding. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She came to visit every few weeks, sometimes bringing homemade soup, sometimes just stories from her volunteer work at the foundation. The walls that once stood between us had started to crumble, brick by brick. One snowy afternoon, she arrived with 2 cups of hot chocolate and that familiar nervous smile. "I thought maybe we could decorate your tree together," she said shyly. I smiled. I'd like that very much. We spent hours untangling old lights and hanging ornaments I hadn't touched in years. Thomas's wooden star, the handmade angels the kids crafted in grade school, the delicate glass snowflakes I'd collected over time. There were moments when we'd both grow quiet, letting the silence speak for what words couldn't. But every so often, Fiona would laugh, really laugh, and it would light up the room. When we finished, she stepped back and said softly, "It's beautiful, Mom. It feels warm again." "It does," I agreed. "It finally does." Later that evening, she hugged me before leaving. "I'll see you next week," she said. "The foundation is hosting a holiday dinner. You should come." The night of the dinner, the world outside was blanketed in snow. I wore a simple navy dress and Thomas's old watch, a quiet tribute to the man whose memory had guided every step of my journey. When I arrived at the foundation, laughter and light spilled out through the windows. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air. Inside, the house was alive, full of people, full of joy. Children ran past carrying cookies, volunteers clinked glasses, and music played softly from a speaker in the corner. The walls glowed with garlands and handmade decorations, and the plaque by the fireplace gleamed in the firelight, "The Thomas Green Foundation Home Where Every Winter is Warm." I stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. My heart swelled with something indescribable, not pride, exactly, but gratitude. Fiona appeared beside me, holding 2 mugs of cider. "It's more beautiful than I ever imagined," she said, handing one to me. "It's home," I replied, my voice catching slightly. "Maybe not ours anymore, but home all the same." She smiled and slipped her arm through mine. "You know, I think Dad would have loved this. I think he's here," I said softly, looking toward the fireplace. "In every light, every laugh, every child who feels safe tonight, he's here." We sat together near the fire, watching families eat and laugh. A little girl came up to me shyly, holding a cookie. "Are you Miss Helena?" she asked. "I am," I said, smiling. She handed me the cookie, a lopsided heart covered in too much frosting. "Thank you for my bed," she said sweetly before running back to her mother. That simple gesture undid me. I looked at Fiona, tears shining in my eyes. That's what this was all for. Not to hurt anyone, to help someone. She nodded, squeezing my hand. "You did, Mom, more than you'll ever know." As the evening went on, I saw Nora laughing with some of the volunteers, her eyes twinkling as she waved at me from across the room. Sylvia was there too, chatting with one of the foundation directors. I realized then that the circle of people around me, the ones who had stayed, who had believed in me, had become my true family. When the dinner ended and everyone began bundling up to leave, Fiona helped me with my coat. The snow outside shimmered under the streetlights. We stood on the porch for a moment, looking out over the glowing town. "I'm glad you came tonight," she said softly. "So am I," I replied. "This was Thomas's dream, but it's ours now too." She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me another chance." I pulled her into a hug. "Thank you for taking it." The air was cold, but our embrace was warm, the kind of warmth that seeps into your bones and stays there. Later that night, I returned home to my apartment by the sea. I lit a single candle by the window and sat down to write the final entry in my journal, the same one that once held all my anger and pain. A year ago, I thought my story had ended. I thought revenge would be my final chapter, but I was wrong. The real ending isn't about what I lost, it's about what I found. Strength, peace, forgiveness. They left me outside in the cold once. But now, I'm surrounded by warmth, the kind that can't be bought or taken away. The kind you build when you choose love over resentment. I closed the journal, feeling the weight of it not as a burden, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and quiet. I stood by the window, holding my cup of tea, watching the world turn white. Somewhere in the distance, the lights of the foundation glowed faintly against the horizon. I smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by the past. I was grateful for it because without the cold, I never would have learned how to build my own warmth. And as the snow danced under the streetlight that night, I whispered to myself, they left me outside in the cold. So I left them outside of my will, and somehow, that's how I found my warmest winter yet.